know.
There you go. So tell me here how you reacted to my post about toxic environment.
Yeah, so your toxic environment post kind of got me thinking because it was specific, but not so specific. And I was like, well, geez, is she talking about an environment that I was part of an experience? Am I not aware of what's a toxic environment or not? Right. And so, and I wasn't sure because it's like, I only have my perspective. I don't, is it a toxic environment? And I'm sitting here leading teams now. I'm running projects. And I'm thinking, gosh, am I blind to what are those signs that an environment actually is toxic? So it did get me thinking about like, geez, and so I did talk to our friend Bill to say, okay, Bill, like, what was your experience? How do you, like, what did you think? And his view was like, this was a great experience. And we're like, okay. And what we were actually talking about is what made it a great experience? Like, why did we think that was such a great experience? Because you're right, there were challenges. It wasn't easy. There were definitely challenges. It didn't always go, our way, right?
Mhm.
But it was still like from both of our experiences and perspectives, a great experience. So we were chatting about, okay, well, what is that exactly? And so that we
Yeah.
could start thinking about, do we have that where we're working kind of now? And one of the
And that's
things that,
exactly why I wanted to connect with you about this, because I also was trying to think, why was it that this specific project we were all involved in, we all still refer to it, still think of it as a good experience, but it wasn't easy. It was really challenging.
oh,
We went through a lot of hurdles. I mean,
yeah,
construction project in the Arctic, collaboration between two departments that don't usually collaborate in such a complex way.
yeah,
Anyway, we went through it, and I still have a good memory out of it. And I
yeah,
was reflecting on what were the factors or the ingredients of it. That's something we can maybe dive into
yeah.
and try to extract from that. But what tells me it wasn't toxic, like it was good experience, is because although it was challenging, I never felt drained. I always felt good about myself, and I felt good about the team and what we achieved. Like it's
Exactly.
always, looking back, I'm satisfied, and through the process, I was satisfied too. I've never felt like quitting. I never felt like I didn't belong. I never felt like
Yeah,
I didn't have my place in it,
yeah.
right?
Like
Or
I'm proud of.
not even close to be on burnout, right? That's another thing
Yeah,
as well that can happen.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that that's exactly it, because there were elements, of things that are potentially toxic. There were definitely those elements, and I see them after the fact. I'm talking to folks that are still there, and there is definitely elements of toxic work environment there. And yet we not only survived it, we actually thrived. And I'm proud of what we accomplished, in there. And but it did make me think to say, like, did we accomplish that despite the toxic environment? Like, did we have to make an extra effort, or did we create within an environment that may have had toxic elements something that was more positive? And it seems like it kind of happened organically, but I don't think that's true. Actually, looking back on it, I actually think there were a lot of things, you in particular, were good at bringing to the team to make that environment positive, right? Like, and how did that happen? I don't think it did just happen by chance because there was a few of us who really enjoyed each other's company and made it happen. Like, I think that there were some very specific things that kind of mitigated some of the potential impacts of those elements that were out there. And like some of that was around like getting the expertise like that we kind of needed so that we didn't feel hung out to dry, right? And I
Mhm.
think too, that flexibility, that willingness to say, okay, the openness to say, okay, it doesn't have to be my way. I'm seeing that a lot now where, if it doesn't go the way the person wants it to go, and this is very common for project managers, I'm going to say. So if the project doesn't go and the decisions made are not exactly what the project manager would like, sometimes it can come across and they can feel like their role is not respected. And
Mm.
I think that that's something that I'm really struggling with, that if sometimes it's seen as a lack of respect that maybe is there but maybe isn't there. And I think that that can become a bit toxic if there's that underlying feeling that you're not respected, that your role is not respected, that you are not respected, that you don't have what you
Mm.
need. then that kind of can create a sort of toxic, underpinning for that environment. And I think what was good on our team is that we were kind of aware of that. Like there was that respect, there were those challenges and we addressed them, and communication. You were really good at keeping us on track, bringing us back to, okay, what are those issues that need to be addressed? A little bit of, honestly, the people management side of things, because
Oh
that's
yes, that was needed. But
right.
I think
Like,
you nailed it. Beyond my role as a project manager, also supporting the change aspect with all the people involved, I think the way we approach the work was like we were able to create that trust within the core team, at least. So we were able to say things for what they were. We were able to discuss difficult things, reassess, but it was that trust didn't happen by itself. I think what helped is that we made time to create those personal connections. This is
very,
what I remember from that team is, yes,
very,
when we sat on a project meeting or we were discussing project things, we were really down to work and really focusing on that. But we also had those moments outside of it where we really cared about one another and trying to understand what is going on in your life, Laurie. And I know
exactly.
about Bill's family, and we
Mhm.
know about the different things that matters, outside of our professional
Right.
lives. We were able to contextualize what was going on, and also, pay attention to like, hey, you look tired today. You don't look like you're on top
Yeah.
of things. So let's chat, right?
Yeah. And that's, Bill and I were talking a bit about that too, is right, really recognizing, each other's strengths, and not really, that territorial kind of thing, which is a thing out there, right? Whereas we would kind of be like, okay, well, who's best positioned to do that? What's the approach that we could take that would have the most success? Does that mean, okay, you know what, Bill, I think this one would work better through D&D because you guys have that. Can you push that forward to D&D and it'll come back down this way? And on our, like, we were just able to kind of respect that and say, okay, I don't have to own it. It doesn't have to be my name on the paper. I don't really care, right? As long
Yeah,
as we can
it was
kind
the
of get it
team.
through. Right. And I think that really helped a lot. I agree with you completely. Having that personal connection, having that team working on it, kind of like we all were invested in the success of it. And I think willing to kind of do what it took and address those issues and come back. So it didn't go our way. It isn't the way we wanted it. We'd have a contentious, conversation. You would help us kind of like deconflict and keep us on, like, okay, guys, at the end of the day, like, this is the decision we have to make, like, and right, and move on. Like, great conversation had. I still enjoy you as a person. I still care about you as a person. We make a project decision. We know what we need to do. Move on to the next thing, right? And so, and so that's what Bill and I talked about, that it, from his perspective, it was very positive as well, because I said, embedding him in our team. We're
Mhm.
not, right? Literally sitting beside, in the
Yeah.
cubicle, that physical thing, that connection. You're part of the team. It's not a name on a list. You're part of the team, right? And so we both really enjoyed that because we had more than enough to do, lots of stuff to learn, make those connections. It's not personal at the end of the day for me. Like, I enjoy the success of a project. It doesn't have to have my name on it.
No,
Like,
you're right.
I
And I
just,
think
right?
that's was the underlying force, I guess, that kept us on track and also working together is we all believe in the purpose of that project.
Yeah.
It had its raison d'être, I guess. It was
Mhm.
meaningful. We knew it would
Yeah.
provide value not only to the people up there in the Arctic, but also, government-wide because of the savings it was creating. So knowing that we all share that the mission, I guess, it was always it was easier when it was getting difficult to always draw back okay, this is what we're working towards. We all believe in it. So what can we do to make it
Agree.
happen? So,
Agree.
and I like what you said as well. I also share that is, I think there were not a lot of big egos in this team. Like there were times where, we had to work with experts that had their big ego, I guess, in the sense that, protecting their image and their expertise, but we were able to really quickly connect to them to say, hey, we value you, but here's, we're a team, we need to be flexible and work together. And
Mhm.
because the core team, we were like this, as you said, just trusting that we all had something to contribute, our strengths, and building
Yeah.
on one another. We
Yeah.
could leave our ego at the door, not having to defend ourselves, and just trust that we'll have each other's back, and
Yeah.
made a
And
big
really that
difference.
appreciation too, because that goes a long way. Like I'll work extra hard if it's kind of recognized that we're kind of doing that. Like
Yeah.
we bought into the mission, we're working, we're resolving those issues, we're getting it done, right? And a little bit of appreciation for that too, because it doesn't just happen. It is an effort,
Mhm.
and that was a massive project in a really, really challenging way for all of us, frankly. And we made it happen. And in a really positive way, even with some challenging, like you say, personalities at the table
Mhm.
and challenging events and what have you, we still got that through. And, I think that's the key thing, is that these environments don't just happen, right? There's an active role we play in creating the environment. And are we aware of that, right? And I
Mhm.
wasn't honestly aware of that consciously until I kind of listened to your talk, and I'm like, huh, you know what? That's a really good point. Like, what makes environment toxic? How do you see that? What's our role in creating that, or mitigating those aspects? It wasn't conscious. Like, I think we just, we, to some extent, we were also lucky in that we had really good people who shared our kind of mindset and
Mhm.
philosophy and what have you. So to some extent it was luck. To another extent, we had you who was kind of filtering that through without us probably even recognizing what you were doing. Although in hindsight,
Doing my magic in the background.
I totally see that. But it was that talk really kind of opened my eyes, because I'm like, yeah, you know what? I've been in a toxic environment and recently, and it was awful. I was on the verge of quitting, because I'm like, I consider myself, I go and I get training, and I can go and get the supports, and I feel like I am a resilient person and what have you. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, at this point in my career, I'm actually thinking of quitting because the environment is that toxic. Right. And
Yeah.
so, it's just not something that you really spend a lot, like we're so kind of, it just is what it is. It's like, well, no, it doesn't have to be that. We can be looking for that. We can understand what makes it toxic and start addressing some of those issues. Right. And that's really where I got to in that toxic environment. Is like, okay, what can I control? What in here is in my, like, what are my actual options, right? I can say I quit and leave. I could say, well, I could change my role and get out of that thing, change my role and say, look, there, it's individual driven, whatever. I'm going to change my thing. I could try and address the two things that are really, really, killing me, like
Mhm.
go above that. But like I sat there and said, okay, like I'm like, I'm on the edge. I'm on the edge of the cliff here.
I hear
What
you. Yeah.
do I do? I need to give myself an action. I can't just sit here and suffer. I need to have an action plan. What are my options? And I think it's those two kind of things: recognizing that you're in the toxic environment, recognizing how you're contributing possibly to a toxic environment without even knowing, and B, what can I do about it? Right? Like, rather than sit there and just be like, oh my gosh, I'm like really, really suffering here. I
Yeah.
really don't feel good. Maybe I need to take some leave. Like, okay, like kind of sit and actually consciously kind of look at those things. And I think as soon as I gave myself some options and made a decision on the action I was going to take, I was immediately like, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I
You
I
regain
don't
your
have to
sense of
sit here
control,
and just,
right? Mhm.
right, I have a little bit of control. And yeah, I'm not going to change the world, but I can change some things. Some things are within mine. I can change my attitude. I can go to my boss and ask for specific things. I can literally leave if that's the best thing for me. I actually have some options and actions I can take and some decisions I can make. So it gives me a little bit of power back to say, okay, this isn't just, oh, well, I sure wish my environment was better. No, I can take action, right? So,
Yeah. And you come to a point where you have to make that decision when you've tried. Anyway, in my case, I've been in an environment that were so toxic. I've tried everything. And you know me, I do my
Mm,
best. I have a very healthy lifestyle, and every day I
yeah,
would come in the office, positive mindset, ready to roll,
yeah,
and the hours will pass, and I will feel drained. Like I
mhm,
would, half day I would be empty and not able to stay
yeah.
positive and
And you don't
contribute
even want to
anymore.
go into the office at certain
Yeah,
points,
and I
right?
tried different things, and but at some point, it's what I realize is it's not that people are toxic, right? It's behaviors are toxic. And
Exactly.
because, a lot of it is driven by the main emotions that we carry around, but
Yeah,
some environments are driven by such low emotions, it's contagious, and people don't even know they operate at this level. Like they don't trust one another, it's fear-based, there's lots of worry and frustration going on,
yeah,
mistrust and blame. It's
yeah.
and there's only so much you can do. But what I realized is, and by the way, that means that we can all contribute if we're exhausted,
Totally.
tired, not paying attention, and we're so concerned about other things. We can come in the office and even add to
Oh,
the
I know.
toxic environment ourselves. So we all do it.
Snap at somebody, right?
Mhm.
And over nothing. It's just like, oh my gosh, this is the 10th time I've said this, like, oh, and it's like, and then you're like, okay, well, what
But
does
it's
that
not
say to that
necessarily
person?
toxic if it's just it happens since here and there. It's normal to have more
Yeah,
difficult
but
days, but it becomes toxic when it's the main driver, like for the entire team, and there's no openness to even address it, right? And this is what
yeah,
I've experienced, and that led me to understand that the opposite of something toxic is an environment when you have this what you call psychological safety, right? Where you feel you can have the right conversations, you can address things that matters, you can address when things are not going well, you
right.
trust people will have your back, that you belong, that you'll be respected, and
Exactly.
that makes the difference. But you're right, you have to be intentional in creating that, right?
Well,
And then
exactly.
to have a core, I guess not only you intentional, but in the group to have a minimum, I guess, number of people who hold that, so that the entire
Yeah.
group can drive on that same
So,
journey.
so you raise a good point, because that's exactly kind of where that next step is going for my current team, who operate, at least as far as I can tell, in a very positive environment, right? However, what we want to do is actually write this down, right? So have a like a, I don't know what to call it, a team charter or whatever, but actually
Some
write these things
principles, yeah.
down, right? That
Mhm.
really say, like, for example, one thing that the a coach I had last year was talking about, and I really liked it. It was around, like, assume the best possible interpretation. So I missed your name on an email invite. It could be that I'm freezing you out and intentionally not inviting to you the meeting to send you a message that your input is not wanted. Or I may have just made a mistake because I'm sending 15 emails in 2 minutes, and I literally put the wrong Chantal on my distribution list. That could be an interpretation. So
Mhm.
assume the best, and really, frankly, don't even assume at all, right? Like, so like some of these things, and to your point around the positivity and the whatever, to actually kind of state those down, because I think this team is sort of organically kind of doing that anyway, but it would be sure nice to kind of actually put that down on writing so that we all
Mhm.
actually agree on what makes this that positive environment, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
can tell people, raise your issues, please don't hesitate. But if you're not comfortable doing that, to me, like, okay, but please reach out to, it doesn't have to be
But you see, that's a very
hierarchical.
good example. For example, assume the best intentions. Well,
Exactly.
you will be able to do that more easily if you've taken the time to build a personal connection to that person. If you get to know the
Exactly.
person, if you had those informal exchanges or open dialogues where
Yeah.
you can start understanding the person and their intentions.
Yeah.
If you never have a conversation with someone, how
Exactly.
can you
Right.
understand what's going on, right? We make sense of what's going on through conversations, and
Yeah,
the more
like build
open
those
and trustful they
personal
are, the better.
relationships, right? And especially difficult in the pandemic. We've all been in our homes and whatever. And so when we have the call, we spend the first 5 minutes, Chantal, how was your 10K this weekend? Right?
Mhm.
Like, oh yeah, did you get totally soaked? You're like building that kind of bit of that personal. We have a weekly chat where it's not work. It's like, what are folks doing on the weekend?
Mm.
Anybody got any special plan? Blah, blah, blah. So to kind of get to know people on a personal kind of level, to connect, because otherwise if the work's your only relationship and that something goes kind of south on that, all of a sudden, like you as a person feel like, okay, yeah, I'm isolated. They don't like, no, there's work. And then there's like who we are as people, and these things hopefully align. But if they don't, at least know that this has nothing to do
You
with
feel
you as a
safe as a
person,
person, right?
right?
You
As a
feel you still have your
person,
place, you still belong.
you
Yeah.
need to take time off for your mental health, then by all means, please do that. Like, I'm not worried about that from a work point of view, right? So, but we want to actually write those down, because to your point about like
Good idea.
the
Mhm.
toxic work environment, like, are we even thinking about that? Like, I don't think we have a toxic work environment, but it'd be great to actually write down more the way you're looking at it. What makes a positive work environment? Our work environment is quite good. So if I'm a new person coming in, what do I need to know about that environment, right? That we do share information. There's no hoarding of information. There's no, if I
Mhm.
have the information and I can share it, I share it. So share information, include as many people as is
That's
practical
great.
on invitations, because really at the end of the day, like if it's not manageable to have 50 people in a meeting, totally understand. If 20 is manageable, great.
Mhm.
I don't care what level they are. Like, meetings attendance is based on the need to be there, the role, what you're bringing to the table. I
Yeah.
don't care if you're a director or the AS2, right? So, but to actually kind of write those things down, because it's almost not so much for my team. I want to share that, with
Mhm.
my colleagues, to say, this is how we operate, right?
I'm just
Because
gonna
that's
pause for a second. I need to plug my computer.
so.
Okay. Yeah, so I think this is a great idea to actually have a discussion about this, those principles, write them down. And what I've noticed too is if you have the habit or the practice of revisiting those regularly, just having a
Mm,
checkpoint, maybe not all of
yep,
those, but just a checkpoint to say,
yep,
how are we doing as a team? Like, and even
exactly.
having questions, I've seen this suggestion lately was very great to say, have you experienced a moment in the last week or whatever last period it was, where you didn't feel safe to comment, to share your ideas,
Yeah,
or to bring up something that happened? Like
yeah,
anytime you don't feel comfortable or safe to do something, to have a checkpoint to be able to share, like, yes, that happened to me recently, and have a
yeah,
discussion as a group to say, okay, what might have caused that? Was it
yeah,
someone's attitude? Was it,
agree.
whatever other thing? And have
Yeah,
the safe space to actually look into this as a group and not
yeah,
blaming one another to say, you
agree
did this.
completely.
No, but
And,
when
and
you
that's,
did that, I felt
well,
this way.
exactly.
Feel
And that's the
comfortable.
other thing that, like, again, like, this isn't about blame, right? Like, it's recognize the issue, have a conversation about where do we go from here. It's never kind of about the blame, but that's exactly it. So we're going to have a series of conversations around what are those principles, what's our team charter about how we're going to work together, right? For ourselves to articulate it for the new people who come in. But to your point, to have that conversation when something doesn't happen, when something happens that goes against those principles, to say, okay, are they still the right ones? Was there a challenge? Is there something we have to pay particular attention to? Because although we put it down on paper, it's not really happening, right? And to kind of revisit those. And so we just going to have that conversation with the team and
Mhm.
say, okay, how do we want to do this? I'd like to get that charter, but it's not something we put up on the wall and it sits there forever and ever. It's a living thing. And to your comment, which I think is really brilliant, is that it's a chance to actually talk about what happens and say,
Mhm.
okay, right? Rather than just say, okay, is that still the same 10 list, but get more into the detail about, okay, did anything, is there an example? Has anything happened where, what we didn't actually follow that principle? And let's talk about that, because maybe our principle needs to be tweaked. Maybe we just need to be conscious, like, ooh, what good reminder, right? And so that it becomes a kind of a living thing and a constant conversation, because we're finding it difficult to have those well-being conversations, because what am I going to do? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to call you up and say, Chantel, like, how are you feeling today, right? Like, but I'm going to be listening and looking in my other ways to say, is anything tweaking me? So if we're missing one of those principles on a regular basis, that's a red flag that something's up with the team, right? So I can use that a bit as well to do that kind of check-in on how we're doing, right? So but anyway, I like I say, I love that talk because it got me actively thinking about it, not just
That's great. Yeah.
assuming that everything that we were doing was leading to a positive work environment. It's like, oh, you know what, maybe we actually have to do some thinking about this, like
Yeah.
what defines our positive environment for us, and how do we monitor that to make sure that that's still working and we're still, doing that the way we want to do it. But but what really tweaked for me, that was very personal. It wasn't a like, here's a checklist for a positive work environment, right? Like it was like, hey, like this is what I experienced, this is what you may have been experienced, these are the challenges, this is why, we
Mhm.
might want to reach out for this kind of help. And just so you know, like I think coaching is a huge thing these days. Like, for I think like I did coaching last year. I think
Yeah.
a colleague had recommended me a coach that they had used. Another colleague is looking for a coach because, we're so isolated right now and we're so
That's the
in the
key.
environment that is really helpful to have somebody not in that environment who can
Well, that's
say,
the role of a coach and a good consultant too, depending on the role, but
yeah,
it's the thinking partner, right? So it's someone that comes along and help you think through the problems, because the thing is people know what they need and they have the knowledge, they have what they need to
yeah,
get through things, but sometimes we just need to take a little bit of altitude, have someone help us
yeah,
gain different perspective, help us think through. And as a wellness coach, this is what I like to do is the people sometimes are just confused as to where to start, what they actually need in the moment to care for themselves.
yeah,
But with coaching, you can help them reassess and clarify what they need, and then
yeah,
as needed, provide advice as well as to how to do
yeah,
it. But yeah,
yeah,
anyway, so I know you're
yeah,
cut in time there. We'll cut this short, but thanks
yeah.
for
Yeah,
chatting
no
about this.
problem, Chantal. And, I'm happy to chat anytime, if you want to kind of chat about other